world religions and the constellations. Since the beginning of time, humans have gazed at the stars and created timeless legends based on the constellations they saw. Is it possible that these constellations have influenced the symbolism and themes found in some of the major world religions today? Today we're going to discuss the strange mystery that includes time itself, the constellations of the zodiac, the Great Year, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and the future of humanity. Chapter 1: The Zodiac. The zodiac is made up of the constellations in an area of the sky that extends approximately 8 degrees north or south of the ecliptic. It is the area of the sky that the sun rises through over the course of a year. It is comprised of these 12 constellations. Nowadays some have come to simply associate these constellations with horoscopes. Fun fact: you are assigned to your horoscope based on which constellation the sun rose in front of on the morning of your birthday. For example, if your birthday is August 21st, you are a Leo, placing the sun in front of the Leo constellation on that date. As the planet rotates around the sun, the constellations behind the sunrise changes, dealing out 12 date ranges assigned over the course of a year to each of the 12 zodiac constellations. Historically, however, these constellations played a much more important role in legends and in oral tradition. Scholars believe that the zodiac constellations were first grouped and named over 20,000 years ago, as evident by cave art in Lascaux, France, and the carvings on the pillars of Göbekli Tepe. Martin B. Sweetman and Alistair Coombs discuss this fact in their paper titled Decoding European Paleolithic Art: Extremely Ancient Knowledge of the Precession of the Equinoxes. This means that these constellations have been contributing to our planet's oral tradition since the Ice Age. Legends of bulls, lions, centaurs, rams, men, and women all derived from the stars above. Now you may ask yourself, if this zodiac thing has been a permanent of our night skies and myths for all this time, why is it now only used for vague personality descriptions? Well, sit back and relax, my friend, because today we are going to discuss how the wisest and most ancient humans have used these constellations to influence billions of people over thousands of years. And no, of course I am not talking about stupid horoscopes. Chapter 2: The Great Year, the Yuga, the precession of the equinox. The Great Year is the longest unit of time derivable from an aspect of our planet's motion, axial progression. The Earth's tilted axis completes a full rotation every 25,800 years, or 1 degree every 71.6 years. This wobble in the Earth's axis has been noticed and plotted throughout history by only the most observant of stargazers. This cycle of time was given different names by different cultures. To the Greeks it was the Great Year, to the ancient sages of India it was the Yuga cycle. The Romans simply called it by its observed celestial movement, the precession of the equinox. Chapter 3: What is the precession of the equinox? Well, first let's discuss what an equinox is. The spring equinox occurs on March 21st. The spring equinox is the day with exactly 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark. The precession of the equinox gets its name from how the wobble of our planet affects the positioning of the zodiac constellations on the spring equinox over 25,900 years. For example, on the spring equinox this year, the sun will rise in the east in front of the constellation Pisces, and over the next 25,800 years, the sunrise, specifically on the spring equinox, will precess 1 degree every 72 years, making its way through all the other constellations of the zodiac. Pisces for 2,150 years, then Aquarius for 2,150 years, and so on. Because of this phenomenon, humans are able to break down the 25,800-year, Great Year, into 12 ages, made up of 2,150 years each. The age is named by which constellation the sun rises in front of on each spring equinox during that 2,150-year time segment. So, We are currently nearing the end of the age of Pisces. The spring equinox sunrise occurs in front of Pisces constellation and has been for the past 2,000 years. The age before ours, the age of Aries, the age after ours, the age of Aquarius. Pretty cool, right? Well, we are just getting warmed up. Now that we are all pros in the origins of the zodiac, the derivation of the great year, and what defines the ages, let's get down to business. Chapter 4: The Timeline. Now with our new information we can plot a timeline, starting arbitrarily 12,750 years ago, or 10,750 BC at the beginning of the age of Leo, then Cancer, Gemini, Taurus in 4,300 BC, Aries in 2,150 BC, Pisces beginning at year 0, and Aquarius in 2,150 AD, each age spanning 2,150 years. Isn't it interesting that the Gregorian calendar begins at year 0, at the beginning of the age of Pisces? Disclaimer. Before we begin, I'd like to make a statement about religion. At risk of oversimplification, I believe each world religion is beautiful in its own right. When it comes down to it, religions are there for their community's ethical and spiritual guidance. Each strives for the betterment of humanity. The deepest thinkers and most intellectual people of each religion have put in some serious time thinking about the big questions, working to find answers to satisfy that hole that most humans feel when pondering the why and how of existence. I will simply be discussing religious symbolism objectively. I will not critique or endorse any form of faith. Now, to begin, the Christian faith began with the figure, Jesus. During the first several decades of the age of Pisces, the two-fish constellation. It is significant that the Christian faith is full of fish symbolism. Jesus' first two disciples, Peter and Andrew, were fishermen. Jesus performed a miracle, multiplying 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish to feed thousands. Christians strive to become fishers of men to grow the faith. One of the Christian symbols is called the ichthys. The Christian faith symbolism correlates with the age of Pisces. This is evidence that its founders considered the stars while creating the tradition of ethical and spiritual guidance that we know as the Christian faith. Now, is it a coincidence that Christianity's founding matches perfectly with the beginning of the age of Pisces? Is it a coincidence that Gregorian calendar begins in the age of Pisces? Are there other world religions with this connection to the ages of the great year? The Jewish patriarch and Islamic prophet, Abraham, is said to have lived around 4,000 years ago, placing him at the beginning of the age of Aries, the ram. The Jewish faith is full of ram symbolism. Abraham was instructed to sacrifice a ram after God stopped him from sacrificing his son. Jewish holy people have ram skins included in their official clothing. The shofar, or ram's horn, is associated with the Jewish faith. The Jewish people, before they fled Egypt with Moses, were instructed by God to slaughter a ram and paint its blood on their mantles. This ram's blood signified their devotion to the Jewish God and protected them from the 10th plague God inflicted on Egypt. We can even go an age earlier, to the age of Taurus, the bull. The Sumerian civilization started during the age of the bull and worshipped them as holy. The Minoans of Greece were established during this age and created a myth about a minotaur, half man half bull. We can even tie in the Judeo-Christian tradition with the story of Moses on the Mount. While Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving the 10 Commandments for 40 days, the Jewish people below thought that Moses had abandoned them. In their doubt they constructed a golden bull calf, a symbol of the pagan faith of their past, and began to worship it. This symbolism found in the cultures and faiths established during this time all allude to the age of Taurus, the bull. The age of Aquarius may be alluded to in the Christian Bible. Christ followers ask him what they can do to prepare for the Passover celebration, a holiday derived from the 10th plague over Egypt. He tells them to go into the city and find a man bearing a pitcher of water. They were to follow this man to his house because it is where the Last Supper was to be held. Perhaps this is Christian wisdom alluding to the end of the age of Pisces. Humanity is to metaphorically enter the house of the water-bearer, the age of Aquarius. We can still go even further, though the evidence is a bit shaky, all the way back to the age of Leo, over 12,000 years ago. Despite what we were taught in our history books, there is a raging debate over the age of the Great Sphinx and the Pyramids of Giza. One theory, by Professor Robert Schoch, dates the Sphinx to over 12,000 years old based on erosion features. The Sphinx is built to face perfectly east as shown here, and what is incredible is that, if the Sphinx is indeed around 12,000 years old, perhaps it was once a great lion that gazed toward the Leo constellation during the age of Leo. Its builders may have built its date into stone by using the stars. If this was the case, it may be that the ancient Egyptians chose to settle near the Great Sphinx and then later recarved it to what we see today. Virtually all historical civilizations all over the world, including so-called primitive ones, have certain things in common. Virtually all of them speak of a time before, a golden age, a time where people lived longer and were more enlightened. Virtually all of these civilizations also speak of a great flood, a deluge, that came and reset humanity to begin again as children, metaphorically speaking. The flood myth motif is found in Mesopotamian cultures, Greek mythology, the Bible's Genesis flood narrative, Pralaya in Hinduism, the Gunyu in Chinese mythology, Muisca, and Canary Confederation in South America, the Atlantis story from the philosopher Plato, and many more. Now, the author, Graham Hancock, and scientist, Randall Carlson, who you may recognize from the Joe Rogan podcast, have been gaining traction with their theory called the comet impact hypothesis. They have gathered evidence that postulates that a comet struck the North American glaciers. This comet would have melted a large portion of the North American glaciers and caused the erosion features seen here in these photos of the North American scablands. This pulse of meltwater would have been the culprit for the 400-foot sea level rise since the Ice Age. Here is a map of Earth with 400-foot lower sea levels. There are millions of square miles of fresh land. Historically speaking, most great cities are all built along coastlines. A sudden 400-foot rise in sea level would have been devastating to these cities and could have sparked the inspiration for our global flood myths. So, to recap, most of our major world religions contain symbolism that correlates with the zodiac constellations and the great year time scale. The zodiac is at least 20,000 years old. The enigmatic Giza Plateau and Sphinx may be remnants of an ancient lost culture that is at least 12,000 years old. Currently it is believed that humans were simple cavemen during the Ice Age. The Sumerians of Mesopotamia are credited with the invention of civilization around 8,000 years ago. It may be that there was a global civilization during the Ice Age that was wiped out by a comet impact and the ensuing flood. It may be that the religious teachings of that age have evolved and split into the versions that we see today. Is it possible that perhaps humanity has forgotten an incredibly influential time deep in our past? Is it possible that during the Ice Age there was a global civilization whose religion was themed using the zodiac constellations? Could this be the reason humanity has chosen to continue with this symbolic tradition? Did the Great Flood catastrophe cause this information to be forgotten? Did humanity forget itself over the hundreds of generations after the Great Flood and before Sumeria? How incredible would it be to rediscover this period in our past? I believe that with enough collaboration and interest, humanity can work together to rediscover our history. Gaining a clear picture of our past will help better guide us toward unity and prosperity during this new age of Aquarius. Thank you for watching. If you like what you saw, please hit that like button and share with your friends. And if you really liked it, then make sure to subscribe. I have many more topics like this one that I'd love to discuss in more depth.